IVM.
Hi, I'm Satyajit.
Hi, I'm Richa.
Welcome to Paperback by the Open Library Project.
We have as our guest today Laxmi Krishnan. She's the host of the Litnama podcast on IVM Podcasts. We discuss Cyber Sexy by Richa, Kaul, Padte.
In the second half, we discuss many Ramayanas by Paula Richman. Happy listening.
In closing, I want to tell you about a dream I had last summer. I dreamed I was asked to read my poetry at a mass women's meeting, but when I began to read, what came out were the lyrics of a blues song. I share this dream with you because it seemed to me to say a lot about the problems and future of the woman writer and probably of women in general. The awakening of consciousness is not like the crossing of a frontier. One step and you're in another country. Much of women's poetry has been of the nature of a blues song, a cry of pain, of victimization, or a lyric of seduction. And today, much poetry by women, and prose for that matter, is charged with anger. I think we need to go through that anger, and we will betray our own reality if we try, as Virginia Woolf was trying, for an objectivity, a detachment that would make us sound more like Jane Austen or Shakespeare. We know more than Jane Austen or Shakespeare knew. More than Jane Austen because our lives are more complex. More than Shakespeare because we know more about the lives of women, Jane Austen and Virginia Woolf included. Both the victimization and the anger experienced by women are real and have real sources everywhere in the environment and built into society. They must go on being tapped and explored by poets, amongst others. We can neither deny them nor can we rest there. They are our birth pains and we are bearing ourselves. We would be failing each other as writers and as women if we neglected or denied what is negative, regressive, or Sisyphean in our inwardness. We all know that there is a story to be told. I am curious and expectant about the future of masculine consciousness. I feel in the work of men whose poetry I read today a deep pessimism and fatalistic grief. And I wonder if it isn't the masculine side of what women have experienced, the price of masculine dominance. One thing I'm sure of, just as a woman is becoming her own midwife, creating herself anew, so man will have to learn to gestate and give birth to his own subjectivity, something he has frequently wanted women to do for him. We can go on trying to talk to each other. We can sometimes help each other. Poetry and fiction can show us what the other is going through. But women can no longer be primarily mothers and muses for men. We have our own work cut out for all of us.
Thank you, Laxmi Krishnan. That was an extract from the book We Dead Awaken by Adrienne Rich. We'll be right back after this to discuss the book in further detail.
Are you constantly seeking happiness? Wondering how to make the most of every day? How not to let your inhibitions stop you from achieving your goals? It's now time to get your A-game on. It's time to unlock your true potential. Tune in to the empowering series with me, Zarina Poonawalla, to feel empowered in all genres of life. From behavioral skills to management skills. From health to relationships. From mental well-being to emotional well-being. And of course, your finances. I've got you covered. With these tips and tricks from me, Zarina, and true life stories from my amazing guests, you're bound to bring your purest to the table. Tune in to the empowering series with Zarina Poonawalla every Thursday on the IVM Podcast app, website, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Welcome to Paperback by the Open Library Project. My name is Satyajit, otherwise known as Onion Knight in most food circles. I'm hosting this podcast with my co-founder at the Open Library Project, Rachita Sharma.
Hi guys, my name is Rachita. I'm an ex-banker, social impact entrepreneur, podcaster, writer, publisher, and inveterate learner. The Open Library Project is a curated library service which is offered to corporates on a subscription basis. The idea here is to create value, build a knowledge community, and encourage a growth mindset amongst our members.
Today we have with us on the show Laxmi Krishnan. Lakshmi is the host of the Litnama podcast on the IVM network. Welcome to the show, Lakshmi.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's great to have you here. And that was a lovely extract.
Thank you.
Can't wait to dive in.
A very powerful extract.
Yes.
It kind of put things in a different perspective straight away, right? So tell us a little bit about, before we get into the book itself, tell us about a little bit about the Litnama podcast and how you got into podcasting and where your love for all things literature comes from.
Wow, okay, that's a very loaded question. I need to unpack it bit by bit.
Let's take it one by one. Yeah.
Yes. So, Litnama happened. I sent a creative brief to IVM a long time ago, and I almost kind of forgot about it.
Okay.
So I had this idea where we still look at literature as in majorly the fiction aspect of it in a very unilateral sense that literature is only what is written and printed.
Right.
But literature can be everything. So literature is music, art. What we're doing right now, it's literature.
Yeah.
So I wanted to bring that angle to the room and draw everybody's attention that literature exists in these tiny spaces that we often don't notice.
Yeah.
So then I sent in a brief and I was like, okay, let's see what happens. September, I get a phone call saying, oh, we read your brief and we liked it and we want you to come in for a meeting. And I was like, what brief? Who is calling?
Right.
Then I came in and a lot of going back and forth on the central idea and piloting the episodes happened. And finally, we started doing Litnama.
Right.
So it came out in December and we are right now on our 8th episode. Like 8 episodes are out. The 9th one is going to be out soon.
Amazing.
Congratulations.
And what
Thank
do you aim to achieve through Litnama? What is the
central
key
idea
focus?
The key focus is to broaden the idea of how we perceive literature in day-to-day life.
Right.
I want you to look for stories in everything possible because as we are growing, evolving in this digital world, the way we tell our stories has become very different.
Absolutely.
So the point is everybody has a story to tell, just that not everybody chooses the pen and paper as the medium.
Right.
Exactly.
So we need to look away from these traditional sources and also look at all the other non-conforming sources as literature and then bring it back to the conversation.
Fantastic. It actually, this is something I've been personally thinking about, and Rachita and I discuss this also quite often. Basically, the tools of creation have changed for us. You know, we used to have, first we had tablets. First we had cave paintings to kind of communicate. Then languages came, then script came. Then you got the pen, paper, book, printing press. Then you got the computer which had a keyboard. Now you have a phone which has a camera, it has a voice recorder. Then you can take these pieces of information, put it into your computer and make a product out of it sometimes and sell it to other people, or if not a product, a story out of it and post it on Instagram. It's amazing, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Like
there are also many more mediums available to express yourself, which makes it easier. Like earlier, you know, if you wanted to tell a story, it was confined to writing a book. You had to be an author. You had to have that background. So it almost made it impossible for most people to, you know, go out there and tell their story.
And story today is even a 3-second story that you post on Instagram.
Exactly,
Like you've gone from like a 3,000-page compendium on what somebody thought in a cave to now like 3 seconds of something like, hey, here's a cave. So that's a huge transition.
It's fantastic and it's great you're doing the show.
Thank you.
Good luck and I hope you get a lot of listeners.
Thank you.
So moving on to the book. Tell us a little bit about how you found this book. Was it a gift from someone? Was it something you picked up consciously?
Okay. So essentially, I study literature. So I'm currently pursuing my master's in arts and literature. And this is a mandatory reading, right?
Okay.
But what happens is generally when you make something as a mandatory reading, I don't know how it goes with both of you, but I feel very repelled from it.
Automatically.
Like you made it homework for me. I hate it.
Yeah.
I'm going to set my first foot into the first page like, I need to do this.
Right.
But when I read this essay, I feel like in that moment, I felt like everything changed because you sometimes read that book and you know that this is it and this is where the way you look at the world is going to change immediately.
Right.
I'm a majorly fiction person. By majorly, I mean like when you all told me that I need to come in for a paperback recording, I was scared. Right? I'm ashamed of my non-fiction reading abilities and now I need to go and talk about them live. But
you're doing a great job so far. So.
Thank God. Not bombing yet. But then I realized I really want to talk about Adrienne Rich because Adrienne Rich's poetry is really, really famous. Everybody has read it. It's a huge part of the American literary conscious. But when you look at essays written by these people, like even if you talk about, say, W.E.B. Du Bois writing about idea of a double consciousness of being a black person, she writes about being a woman. And it's so lucidly written, it just flows through. And I think this is not something that only I felt. I studied in a women's university. And this was supposed to be a mandatory paper for all of us.
Right.
And this was that one answer all of us were super confident about walking into the exam hall. One question you ask us about Adrienne Rich and we're going to ace it.
Yeah.
That happened.
Yeah.
We got a question, all of us wrote the entire essay and quoted from it and gave good examples, because somewhere I feel that happened because it was a lived experience for us all.
Right, exactly. You can relate to it.
We can relate to it, not only in the sense of, okay, I relate to what, say, Jane Austen was going through, but in the sense of, this is my reality, because most of us write, speak at places, and we realize that we've also been actively silenced in a similar way, where literature created by women has been dealt with in a similar way. So when somebody goes out there and writes about it, and you feel like, okay, I feel seen, and that's the power of good nonfiction.
And I think for the longest time, even women's problems have been addressed by men.
Correct.
They've been, written about by men, and so it's just one perspective on it.
Correct.
So I definitely think women should be writing more. They should be expressing themselves more.
Correct.
And that's, I think, the key lesson from this book as well.
Yes, and the key lesson also that she tries to go through is she also calls out women in the process, which is very interesting, right? Because she says Virginia Woolf has been writing about us, and Jane Austen has been writing about women all the time. She's not taking away that from the other authors, female authors who've been there. But she's like, are we talking about somebody or are we talking over somebody? So it's back in the day where she's bringing up the questions of representation that we ask about now. Like right now you're asking who's telling your story.
Yeah.
She's saying we need to, as poets, also analyze how are we telling people's stories, because you have the power, you have the voice. You can talk about the woman who does not have a voice, but you need to make sure you don't talk over her, because that's what men have done all the time.
Yeah.
So she's very consciously aware as to why is she writing this and why is she saying what she's trying to say through, like, and it's very concise and it's very simply put, which makes it more powerful, because she's not using your jargons like a lot of male authors try to. For example, when Foucault is also trying to break down power in his essays, he's still using a lot of academic jargon. Right now she's writing this for any woman who would pick up this and read it.
Great.
For example,
it's a good read for anybody,
woman, right? Because if I'm sitting here in the 21st century,
equally, I guess.
Men equally, yes.
They need the understanding more than us.
Yeah, I stand corrected. For any person,
right?
Yeah, who picks it up in 21st century can still relate to what was written back like in 1900s. Is a good feat to offer,
And has she cited any examples from her life that, really stood out for you?
I'm just going to quickly go back. So this is like my annotated version is what I like to call this, because this was published in like 1971.
Okay.
She starts off with When We Dead Awaken is actually a reference to Ibsen's play by the same name. So, like where the male artist and the thinker is in the process of creating culture, quote unquote, is what she talks about, where he is trying to show awakening in women.
Okay.
But she talks about the fallacy of an awakening consciousness, because you say that you need to kind of empower people. But what after that?
Right.
Like, what happens when your conscious is awake and when you're empowered?
Yeah. What are the
Where
steps?
do you go from there?
Like, exactly.
Now what do I do? Like I have all of this awareness. Where do I put it? And she just says that this is confusing because class and caste works in very different sense. She of course doesn't refer to caste, because when you put it in Indian context, you realize her idea of a class makes more sense here. Like you're saying that Savarna women need to make way for voices, but most of the times we are just talking over people.
Right.
So instead of, say, for example, me talking about caste, let's get actually a person who's working in the industry where they're trying to empower their people to come and talk. And she's referring to all of these because she talks about writing as a revision, right? But revision is equally scary because she defines revision in a very interesting way. She says it's the act of looking back or seeing with fresh eyes or entering an old text from a new critical directions. For most of us, it is a chapter in cultural history, but for women, it becomes an act of survival.
Yeah.
Because when we sit back,
that's
generally,
so profound, actually.
Yeah, in nonfiction that happens a lot, right? Because say somebody's revisiting Pride and Prejudice and talking about why is the sixth sister oppressed, right? Because you hear a lot about the Bingleys and the Bennets, but what about like Mary? What happens to her? Nobody knows. Lydia is shown in a very different light. Lydia would make for a great chick lit character. Like I feel like that's always the case. But a woman has to rewrite everything to survive. So I think there's a lot of layers to unpack in her writing.
And they need to start writing, and they definitely need to be heard more.
Yeah.
I think that over the last century, even in moving into this century, there's a lot of, rightly speaking to the excerpt that you mentioned,
Correct.
the balance of power is sort of shifting back, and then all this uncomfortability that we are talking about, where males suddenly are saying that,
Correct.
I am feeling uncomfortable. It's the reverse of the patriarchy that's happening, just because the other side, the other gender is being more empowered just by voicing their own opinions or like giving a strong opinion to their thoughts, and which was suppressed so much earlier. So I think I always say we're moving. Things have not moved, but things are moving in the right direction, and it's amazing. It's a credit to all the authors of the past, right? There's a book even Virginia Woolf wrote, which is a non-fiction book, where she talks about the same thing and why women should write, and they should definitely write their truths, which is true to them. So it's a great time to be alive.
And she mentions Virginia Woolf because she talks about how, are you talking about Room of One's Own here? Yeah. So in Room of One's Own, she also talks about how she feels that Virginia Woolf is still writing to appease the men in a certain sense, because you want liberation from, say, point B. This is what Adrienne Rich is trying to attack, that there's still the tentativeness. Okay, who's listening to me?
Right.
Are you writing for the women to be liberated, or are you writing about the men to realize that we need to be liberated? Which is very important to take that first step. Where I feel this essay also answers itself, right? Because the awakening consciousness, this is what you do with it. When a woman tries to push the envelope across, instead of just criticizing her, you hold her hand and you help her push that further enough.
Absolutely.
So, because she talks about this notion of special women, right? I think now in literature, or even in how we look at management, self-help, this idea of being like not like other girls is something that keeps coming back and forth. And she says that idea of a special woman is nice because we think like special women themselves define themselves as special women. So what she's trying to say here is that it's easy to talk about women writers. Because you know that everybody's criticizing them, so I'll just add my 2 cents worth to it, and it'll just be a part of a larger criticism. But she says that women seem to have become special women here because we have liked to think of ourselves as special, because we know that men would tolerate or even romanticize us as special as long as our words and actions did not threaten their privilege of tolerating or rejecting us according to their idea of what special means. So it's just like I can go on and on about this for like an hour straight. There's so much to unpack right now.
It's a fantastic book because the perspective offered is totally contradictory in some terms to what is the accepted narrative going on, right? So it's a fantastic book. Thank you for discussing it with us.
I also think women should start writing because we ourselves need to sort of understand what we want.
Correct.
Because till we don't address it, till we don't pen it down, I don't think even women know what to do with, like you said, now I'm empowered, now what do I do with it?
So we can talk about all the management books and the self-help books and everything possible. And women are writing those as well. And they're writing really, really well. But where do we go from there?
Exactly.
Right? Because I can read a Rhonda Byrne and be like, yes, I feel connected with myself for some reason. But where do I then take that connection? And if you're
what
not,
do I make of it? Like, how does it help me make my life better? Or
exactly.
And then benefit someone else. I think that should, that sort of idea should be there in everybody's mind. Like that, intent should be there to sort of.
I think intent is a very powerful thing to use because with what intent do we also read these books? Right? I mean, do you read them like, how do we, our idea of self is also so like thwarted in this, like,
I mean,
from
you
our own
really
experiences, right?
You really need to give it a lot of thought to kind of know what your true self is. And I don't think in these times, this digital age, no one takes out the time to even think about, hey, why am I even doing this? Does it make me happy? Am I doing it for my happiness, someone else's happiness? What is my truth, right? So like a lot of things to think about. And a great book. Thanks.
I love books which make you think and make you like introspective.
When your perspective is changed a little bit, and you rightly said it takes one phrase, one sentence, one word somewhere, and then your perspective is changed forever. You can never go back to the earlier way of thinking because suddenly you're like, oh wow, this has so much clarity. Like everything makes sense now.
And this is not something that just I am taking out of it. She's taking this out herself because she talks about this one poem she wrote. And she wrote it and she forgot about it and she has it published and printed. Then she wrote this essay And then she started looking back at that poem and like, okay, I did something wrong there.
Right.
So she rewrote a whole piece altogether. And so now it feels complete because I'm aware of what I'm writing.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I think Moment of Lift is that book for me, where I read it and I was like, oh my God, I had a totally ignorant perspective on a lot of things. And so great, must read, guys. You must definitely pick this book up.
And we're going to take a short break and we'll be right back after this.
Hey everybody, welcome to another awesome, amazing week on the IVM Podcast Network. If you aren't following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We'd like to thank our sponsors this week, HDFC Life and Paytm Money. Sponsors make this stuff possible. If you work for a brand which you think would benefit from sponsoring show on IVM, please do reach out to us. We appreciate that. We have 3 new shows releasing this week. Uncle Please Sit. It's a podcast where Tushar and Joel speak about and strip away the misinformation of fact-free opinions that we often encounter in public. Stay tuned for the first episode releasing this Monday, the 9th of March. We're starting a new podcast called Smile India, hosted by Shifa Maitra. This podcast is both in English and Hindi, and it tells us about the uplifting and positive news from around the country. Episodes drop every Monday and Thursday starting the 9th of March. And Absolutely Right is a graphology podcast. That's right, graphology. Host Aditi Surana deploys her superpower of handwriting analysis and unravels some traits and characteristics of guests, including me and a whole bunch of people from IVM who you're familiar with. Stay tuned for the first episode releasing this Wednesday on 11th of March. On Advertising is Dead, Varun is joined by Tarika Soni, the head of monetization at Snapchat. They talk about content in the world of social media. And people, Edges and Sledges celebrated its 100th episode last week. Go back and listen to that if you haven't yet. This week, they talk about the Women's T20 World Cup India versus Australia final. And on Begin the Journey this week, Ashish shares a short story on dreams and joining the dots in our life. On Simplified, Tony, Naren and Shrike discuss the world's happiness index. On Paperback, Rachita and Satyajit are joined by the host of Litnama, Lakshmi Krishnan. They talk about women's role in writing and fiction written by women. On The Habit Coach, we have a Women's Day special where Ashton talks about periods, PMS, PCOD, and other taboo subjects which shouldn't be taboo at all. On Geek Fruit, Dinkar and Jishnu switch things up and talk about some pop culture other than movies that they've been following, from YouTube channels to reality TV shows. On Mr. and Mrs. Binge Watch, Janice and Anirudh discuss Season 2 of Narcos Mexico. On the Empowering series, Zarina is joined by actor Jim Sarb. They talk about the art of storytelling and his unconventional characters. On Postcards from Nowhere, Utsav shares some fascinating stories of Bengali food. And with that, let's get you on with your show.
It is a truth universally acknowledged that art, ideas, or women that disrupt a stale moral universe must be in the want of a comparison to prostitutes.
Thank you, Lakshmi Krishnan. After that very insightful first half, we're back. And in the second half, we're going to be discussing, that was a quote from Cyber Sexy by Richa Kaul Padte. And a very interesting quote again.
A little more.
So tell us a little bit about this book, Cyber Sexy, and let's start with that quote, a very interesting quote.
Yeah. When I read it, my mind was obviously blown because coming back to Jane Austen all over, I think everything, the conversation goes full circle. So I picked this book up because I had seen a lot about it on Instagram because I follow Richa online, and I believe this was her dissertation converted into a book. She was doing a research about it. So she's written this in like compact essays that are put together to create a larger narrative. And in this first half of it, she's trying to trace her journey with pornography. Which is so relevant because it talks about a very, very simple journey as a young girl who was staying in India, then moved to England. How did she figure out? Then she's also talking about the time when MSN Messenger chat boxes were a huge thing. How did people feel like women don't know about them because they were idly hidden from us? But then everybody knew about it. It was an open secret that women also use MSN Messenger.
Who are the guys talking to us?
Exactly. Other guys. I've heard that's a very prevalent thing on MSN Messenger. Oh God. But then I like how she explores the idea of porn itself because it's supposed to be something that oppresses women in a larger sense. So the power dynamics and everything comes back into the room. But she makes it so simple because she's historically trying to trace firstly her experience with it, then where did porn actually begin, what is the terminology, why is it used, why is it derived from the word prostitutes, how does pornography then go on. So it's called Why Porn 101. Porn 101, what counts. So basically she's giving you a countdown through history and the journey of sexuality through that.
I think because grave issue that's existed for a really long time is that women should not be allowed to feel pleasure.
Yeah.
Because they are supposed to just reproduce and that's their duty. So they should not be like deriving pleasure out of it.
Yeah.
Which has been the thinking in many religions for very, very long.
Correct.
So I guess, the underlying message here has to do with,
Yeah.
you are allowed to have fun. You are allowed to express, whether it's
Correct.
expressing through writing, it's expressing your love in various formats. Women should be given that opportunity.
Yeah, and I think she again takes this very people view as opposed to just like a men or women, because she obviously addresses the power dynamics, but she talks about David LaChapelle's art and so she's talking about how the idea of high art, medium art, low art functions. So she's talking straight from like a MoMA museum exhibit to theater in Mumbai showing like third grade movies and the idea of calling them third grade in the first place, because everybody knows what happens in these theaters, but you don't discuss it. It's not decent enough for women to talk about it, or just like to discuss it on a podcast maybe.
But your face is not visible.
So of course, I'm an anonymous being. I'm just going to ask them to crop out my full name from the conversation. And a very interesting thing that she discussed, and something I had heard from friends, was the usage of the term bhabi. Because this entire fascination, this cultural fascination that people have had, and how subtly she's trying to like highlight high art is when, say, you see an art by a high-end American artist where it talks about, or like a sculpture of a nude woman and that adorns like buildings and like architectures. And then you see the idea of an Indian woman being reduced to a bhabi and how that becomes a lens which differentiates you, or how in layman language is that word used to connotate something completely different, which you think is very innocent, but it's actually not on so many levels. And this entire aspect of how people's foray into porn, for a lot of them, was through reading these comics, which were made for a really long time. And that's about reading as well, right? So we tend to have a very closed range of reading sometimes, even when it comes to non-fiction. But then you see books like these, which also challenge how you've read books all your life. Because the day I got this book home, my mother was like, "Why are you reading about pornography? What's happening?" And I was like, "Why not?
Is this in your curriculum?"
Yeah. Of course, I hid it for like a week until I was like, "Oh, is it PG-13?" But somewhere this has started a lot of conversations in my home, which otherwise just the cover of it, and it's not like a scandalous cover. It's just a woman with what I like to believe are shattered thoughts, trying to collect them and make sense of them. And from there to my mother is like, why? And I was like, listen, it doesn't say pornography, it says rethinking pornography. And the idea that why can't women have power in pornography? Like questioning the power dynamics. It doesn't always have to be the other way around. A lot of women actually choose to be a part of this. So in the pop culture phenomenon, you talk about the sugar daddy complex and all of that. But then I just saw a video from Vice the other day where they're actually interviewing a lot of these girls who work as sugar babies. It's an actual profession. There's an app called Seeking Arrangements, and it actually like sets you up with people. It doesn't always have to be sexual. It can be like an arrangement where you give them attention, care, and in return you get paid for that. And for us in this cultural setting, it sounds so whack. Whack is the appropriate word I would like to go for. Like, you can't imagine something like
it's
that.
so alien, the concept to us to even like consider, I'll pay someone to listen to my feelings or whatever, right? It's so... Why would you do that?
Loneliness, right?
But honestly speaking,
what a lot of men must be doing with prostitutes, they must be actually paying them to sort of listen to their voice. It's just that all of this exists and it's not been ever addressed vocally, but it's prevalent in all societies.
I just think it speaks a lot to loneliness as well. Like, even though we are being so connected digitally, individually we're becoming more lonely as people. So
who would you recommend this book to?
Wow. I would actually recommend this book to everyone in the age group of like 60 to like whatever age you want to read, because I feel like 16 is the right time, or even 15 for that matter. I don't know what young kids are up to these days. I feel very old. Even when I'm 21, I don't relate to my sister in terms of Like you,
But the younger people would benefit more
more because she talks about a lot of these things for which we are shamed all our lives. Like she talks about art as a concept where she's describing where she went to this talk and everybody was dressed in like fancy saris and like hair tightly tied in a bun, and she's just wearing like shorts and a t-shirt because she was there to listen. She didn't know that listening is a practice. It's like a social practice where you need to dress up for the occasion. Stuff like this is what makes you insecure in your growing years. I think that is what's happened to me as well. Like going to Lit Fest, the first time I went for it, I thought it's like going to any other lecture. You wear your usual clothes. I didn't know you're supposed to have a khadi wardrobe that's reserved for like December, January, February when you go to Lit Fest. Like, oh God, So I think the younger you read it, the better, because, and also not younger than that, because then it becomes a risk that you're exposing them for too much information at one go. It's something that you should read in bits and pieces, and like I generally, what I do with this is I tell excerpts from it to my sister. So like, because she doesn't like reading at all. So hey, listen, this is one very fun thing I read today. This is this what happens, and I feel like it's important. We need to have those conversations with women and young men across the globe.
More communication and conversation is the need of the hour.
Definitely.
Open, transparent. Great. So, great book. Great.
Thank you. And I don't want to hide this like I'm hiding a copy of Manohar Kahani. Come on. It's so much better than that.
So, the next book that we're going to speak about is Many, Many Ramayanas.
Yes.
And who's the author of this book?
Okay, I am completely unashamed to say this was also my syllabus book because I feel like most of my non-fiction reading picked up when I started studying literature.
Right.
I feel like this book needs
outside the syllabus, is it?
Yeah, this I read outside the syllabus because we were supposed to read like the first essay.
Okay.
And I was like, no, listen, this book is brilliant. I want to read the whole thing. And I went ahead and I did that. And I feel like academics has done a good job for me to introduce me to stuff.
Yeah.
But academics also does not really, like, it's also very political, right? So it does not really push the entire envelope across.
Yeah.
When I read Many, Many Ramayanas, it kind of gave me a framework to look at pop culture in a very different sense, because the essay starts from talking about Ramayanas, how there is no one Ramayana is basically the gist of it all. And Paula Richman is a historian who's written this book and who's basically compiled this book with a brilliant introduction to it, and it has a lot of essays from other people who are analyzing regional Ramayanas in their sense. Now David Sherman is another Ramayana expert across the globe, and his voice and his words are very revered in the circle. So it picks up from a lot of things that other historians, other artists have said, and put together a compendium that will change how you look at the story of Ramayana itself.
Nice. So it's like a multiple perspectives.
Multiple perspectives. So basically this one thing that stuck with me was Rumila Thapar, another historian, has said that how the Ramanand Sagar version of Ramayana was actually a state-sponsored version, which kind of cleansed how you sanitized version of a Ramayana that it's sold to the people, where Sita is docile and wars happen in a very imaginary space and Rama is Purushottam. Right. That's the thing. It makes him more godly because he has flaws. And he's very... If you read the Valmiki Ramayana, you will realize Ram is very aware that he's a flawed being. And that is what makes him more powerful over Ravana, who thinks he's perfect. Like he's mythical, he's perfect, he's got all the powers in the world. And that's what leads to his loss. So... And how colossally our interpretations are different, because see, somewhere it's an Aryan narrative. So how does the South perceive an Aryan narrative? So South India has their own versions of Ravan. Like Ravan's perception, because the idea
is he also
was,
an Aryan in the South version?
No. All of them are Dravidians.
Dravidians.
So in the Dravidian sense of it, there's a text called Kamban Ramayana. It's written by Kamban, very obviously. And there's a fun politics to it, because this text is written along the time when Bhakti movement was picking up in Tamil Nadu. So there's a lot of worshipping, and like that is where elevation of Rama as a god really happened through that text. But at the same time, there is a lot of reasoning that is done. So anytime, for example, killing of Vali becomes a very non-Kshatriya thing to do. Because Kshatriya code doesn't allow you to attack someone from behind or from a hidden position. So Rama is technically compromised there. Lakshmana comes in to give a long description as to why that needed to be done. When Shurpanakha's nose is being chopped off, you don't really attack women in the Kshatriya dharma. Lakshmana steps in again to give a long description about why, justifying everything. Kamal really puts a lot of thought and justifies his God. So that's where you realize how religion, literature, fiction, non-fiction, all is tied so closely, and like the differences between them are so thin.
Yeah.
Especially in fact, we had Ashwin Sanghi on the show earlier, and he in fact said that, how do you know it's fact? It may be one person's fiction that he has written down, and it may be another person's fiction he's written down, right?
Correct.
So all these stories that we've taken as fact, it could be some person's version of a fiction story, and which has now passed through so many generations and become fact in our
Did you know there is
current
something called
understanding?
a Mappila Ramayana, which is a Ramayana by Muslims in Kerala?
Really?
Yeah, there is a tribal version of Ramayana.
Wow.
There is something called the Ravanayan, which is Ramayana from the Ravan's perspective, which then also gave way to Asura, Ban and Nilkantan to come about. And right from there, so there's this another essay in the compendium which is really relevant to Ramayana studies. It's called 100 Ramayanas by A.K. Ramanujan, where he's trying to trace all of these stories of Ramayana and how they worked across the country. And there he refers to all of these. Ramayana also is in Sinhalese, is in Malayalam, has influences in Thailand. It's across the globe, but it all comes down to how do you choose to perceive it.
Right.
Because then if you go on to read The Liberation of Sita by Volga, you will know how it's very radically different. I think when we talk about Indian feminist treatises, that book stands on top of them all, because it's looking at these 4 women from Ramayana, and they come together, and how is Sita then navigating through this idea of liberation and being shackled. All of these, so examples like these are given in Paula Richman's work, where she's trying to trace and collect data on as many Ramayanas as possible to put together something that is very cohesive for your understanding. That's the thing. That's over time people have considered it as a very political piece of art, tried to take it out of syllabi. But it's not supposed to be an attack on what Ramayana stands for. In fact, it establishes that every region has their own claim to Ram.
Right.
Exactly.
And they have the freedom to interpret their Lord as they want, because if you've seen pictures of Rama, Sita, Lakshman and Hanuman together, some places he's blue, some places he's green, and some places he's brown, and some places he's whiter than any Aryan to ever exist. So you should have that freedom to kind of access and interpret your gods in the way you like. That's where I feel like non-fiction plays a huge role, because fiction also kind of limits the universe somewhere. Non-fiction lets you put that tug and just be like, hey, listen, what if? And take another interpretation out of it. So I think
Look at it from this
definitely,
lens.
I think any kind of teachings should have that, open-ended perspective available, where you can make whatever interpretation you want to based on your understanding of it.
Correct.
And I think over time it can change, it can stay the same, you can totally disregard it, or maybe it can just become your way of life. That's
Correct.
an
Like now,
individual's perspective.
Sita's docility as a concept, like Sita should be very docile, but everybody knows that in the Valmiki Ramayana, she's like a warrior princess.
Right.
Like only one person can lift Shiva's bow apart from Ram, and that's Sita. And they're the actual original power couple, the ones that you hype up on Instagram these days. They are the ones. They started it all. Call them fictional, call them real. That's your call to take. But I feel like everybody should have that freedom of interpretation, which over time is being taken away. So there are a lot of questions, like some of the Ramayanas don't have certain parts to it, like don't have a story of what happens after they return to Ayodhya. That's why the story ends. But then we all know that some claim that Rama killed someone, and then how does that become very political act? And just the abandonment of Sita becomes another thing for him to figure out.
In fact, in Sita's perspective, they've gone into detail about how she had to prove herself to her husband, and why women always have to go through the
Agni
Pariksha. So it's quite fascinating, actually.
When it comes from a woman like Paula Richman, who is so people criticize her also because she's not native to India. So she has done her studying, and I feel like somewhere she has had the privilege to look at it from a very objective lens.
Right.
That's what happens with history books as well, right?
Correct.
Like an Indian person would be too emotionally involved to possibly offer an unbiased perspective, whatever that bias is. So even a lot of history books, similar to many Ramayanas, history is being revisited because people are looking at it from not the winner's perspective only, but all the other perspectives and stories that exist around that maybe one event, similar to the Ramayana, which kind of has permeated through our history across the country. And you're absolutely right when you say everyone should be, should have their own version of their God. That's their right.
And to make an informed decision, you should be able to know all the perspectives before you make your a decision on something.
It's fantastic when you see different perspectives of the same event. It's like that event is suddenly completely different, right? Because especially something like the Ramayana, the first time I read Sita's perspective of things, it was just shocking for me. It was just like, wait a second. Is this what's happening right now? So, it took a little getting used to, but then it's like, oh, okay, that's one side of the story.
Correct.
This is another side. There's another side to it also. So there are many sides. And then you can kind of figure out what narrative sits with you the best.
Happens in Liberation of Sita as well, right? Because in the last chapter, you get to see what Rama also feels about Sita being abandoned. Which side is something that's not shown in narratives written by men all over, because they're just like, oh, Rama is this built-up man, a jock of all sorts, and he's just not going to feel anything about his wife not being with him.
And she has to do it.
There's an actual bit where he starts crying because his world revolved around her. They were absolutely in love, and he talks about how he was shackled to the throne and the 14 years of a vanvas liberated him, allowed him to be in love and be with the love of his life. But now he's back and shackled, and she's the only one who's liberated because he's now with this throne tied up and he's helpless and he can't even bring her back. So I think, people like Paula Richman who are trying to collect these voices and put them across are kind of doing a really good job, even if you feel like sometimes it's not culturally as poignant as, say, it coming from somebody from India. But I feel it needs to be appreciated in a place where it comes from.
Definitely. So another great suggestion. This book is for, I guess, all Indians. And who want to
I think anyone
get
who
a more
wants to know
comprehensive
about
view
Indian Hindu
on our Hindu
religion.
texts.
I think most of your authors who are writing these multiple perspectives are using this as a primary reader to kind of get into people's minds as to what is this character thinking, what is that character thinking.
So for future history authors as well. Great. Awesome. So thank you so much, Lakshmi, for being on the show. When does Litnama drop? Which
so Litnama is Tuesdays. All Tuesdays.
And where can people find you on social media?
So I'm at the Literary Chills, LITRARY and CHILLS on Instagram and Twitter, and that's where basically I am. I exist on Instagram. That's it.
Fantastic. Great. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. And I absolutely love Paperback. I just need to tell you all are doing a brilliant job also with the Open Library Project. So
thank you so much.
Thank you.
And a big thank you to all our listeners. You can follow the Open Library Project on LinkedIn, Instagram and Facebook for latest updates on our events, and stay tuned for the next Paperback podcast on IVM Podcasts. Happy reading. You can follow IVM Podcasts on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter at IVM Podcasts. Listen to Paperback on the IVM Podcast app, website or wherever you listen to podcasts.
How many times have you motivated yourself to improve your sleep or lose weight or be more productive? How many times have you failed? Hi, my name is Ashton Doctor. Tune into my show, The Habit Coach Podcast, where we focus on creating small, tiny habits to improve your life instead of those big, impossible tasks. So make listening to me a habit every Monday, Wednesday and Friday on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcast.com or on your favorite podcasting app.
Look! Up in the internet! It's a meme! No! It's a cat video! No! It's the Geek Fruit Podcast!
That's right. We interrupt this riveting broadcast to tell you about our show, The Geek Fruit Podcast, where Tejas, Dinkar and I, Jishnu, talk about everything in pop culture, including DC, Marvel, Star Wars, Netflix, and everything in between.
You know how your friends hate it when you ramble about some nerdy crap and you just want somebody to listen to you? Well, sorry, there's nothing we can do about that, but come listen to us ramble and it'll almost be like the real thing. Kind of.
Listen to new episodes of the Geek Fruit Podcast every Monday and the Geek Fruit Bulletin every Thursday on iTunes, Google Podcasts, the IVM app, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Happy listening, you nerds.